Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Center for Healthy Sex's Sex Expert webinar series. My name is Charlie Beckerman. I help run the series, and today we're very excited to welcome Staci Sprout. Center for Healthy Sex was founded in 2005 by Alex Katahakis and Douglas Evans to be a resource for people here in Los Angeles and all over the world. We provide individual, couple, group, and intensive therapy services for men and women, working to address a wide variety of sexual concerns, including sexual dysfunction, desire differences, sexual addiction treatment, and support for partners of sex addicts. And if you have any questions about our clinical services, we have intake counselors standing by at 310-843-9902 to talk to you about our various treatment options. We also provide trainings. We have an 18-hour sex therapy course we provide each fall, and an 18-hour sex addiction therapy course each winter, which this year was so successful we actually ran a second course in the spring. We also have a free monthly CEU lecture here in our West LA offices, and of course this is all in addition to our monthly guest webinars, which we're so excited that you've joined us for today. For more information about any of our trainings, you can sign up for our email list by emailing info@centerforhealthysex.com, or you can call us, and again, that number is 310-843-9902. Just a couple of quick notes before we get to Staci. For those of you who've attended our previous webinars, you'll notice that things look a little bit different. Any meeting has updated their interface, and a couple of features have changed. We'll no longer be able to allow users or attendees to ask their own questions aloud over audio. So if you have a question for Staci, go ahead and use the chat feature, which is to your left, and Staci will be pulling questions from there. If you're joining us via phone and want to ask a question, you can email me your question and I'll put it into the chat for you. And my email is charlie@centerforhealthysex.com. There's also, you might see a new Q&A function, but we're not going to be using that. We'll be doing everything in the chat, so just throw all your stuff in there. And now on to our guest. We're super excited to welcome Staci Sprout today. She's a licensed psychotherapist, author, and publisher. She has 20 years of experience as a therapist and social worker in a variety of settings, from community mental health and hospitals to private clinical practice. Staci's a certified sex addiction therapist, and since 2006 has dedicated her practice to helping individuals, groups, and couples in recovery from sex and relationship addictions. She conducts trainings on sexual ethics for professionals and is an experienced retreat and conference speaker where she regularly shares the story of her recovery from extreme childhood trauma and multiple addictions. Her book, Naked in Public, a memoir of recovery from sex addiction and other insanities, which we're very excited to talk about today, was published in 2015. And with that, welcome, Staci.
Thank you, Charlie. Thank you for that. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, you're good.
All right. Thank you. So welcome to this webinar. I am excited to be here, and I also feel very grateful to be here. I realize it is such an honor to get to talk about sexual recovery and to break through that taboo that surrounds us and to create a new paradigm. And that's why I titled this talk, Talking Naked in Public, a Memoir and a Movement, because I am interested in seeing more conversations take place. And of course, the Naked in Public is an evocative title. The meaning of it to me, in addition to being a reference around sexuality, it has to do with the dream that many people have about, having a dream. Oh my gosh, the exposure. And I think for me, publishing this book has been kind of like a dream at times, like that, like, wow, it's really out there. And yet, grounded in that is a great gratitude and privilege, because I'm not really talking about sex addiction, I'm talking about sexual recovery. And that is one of my favorite topics. So thank you for joining me. And hello, Carrie. I see a chat greeting there. I will be using the chat feature during this our conversation, so feel free if you want to join in there to type away. So I'm waiting for the slide to upload here. Who am I and why am I doing this? I always ask that question when I'm watching speakers. And my name is Staci Sprout, as has been said. I'm a recovered sex addict. So I tell about what that means in my story, but it gives me a certain experience to want to take that message of recovery to others. And as was said, I published a memoir about my story in 2015, and I will be talking from that book today and doing some readings. I work vocationally as a therapist, as has been said, in Seattle, Washington. I'm here now, and I have, through my own recovery, become an activist trying to raise awareness culturally about healing and hope from sex addiction. And this is just the logical next step of my recovery. And so it's been interesting since I published the memoir. I have received wonderful feedback. There's over almost 2,000 books in circulation out there now, and it has really been touching to receive emails or feedback from people on Facebook about their experience of reading about my story and maybe sharing some of their story as well. It's been an incredibly connecting experience since I've published it. And before I published it, I was very afraid. And I can remember my husband and I talked about all the worst case scenarios of what could happen. And none of them have come true. And so my experience has been that putting out a vulnerable story about recovery has led to more love and connection in my life. And so I'm, again, just grateful to get to share some of that today. Thanks, Max. Quote about hearing the honesty. Yeah, that's so much of the gift of recovery in my experience has been sitting in rooms with other people or with helping professionals who were sharing honestly with me and teaching me how to be honest. So back to who am I and why am I doing this? Last year I published I'm very excited. Last year I published 2 articles. One was called How to Deal with Unwanted Staring, Yours or Theirs, and that was inspired by my own experience as a starer and then as being stared at. How do I boundary that? And then how to make obsessive thoughts and fantasies go away. And after I published those articles, I received an invitation by my colleague and friend, Alexandra Katahakis, who runs the Center for Healthy Sex here in LA. And I was very honored because they do such amazing work in getting the word out globally with these webinars and the talks that Alex gives all around the world. She trains therapists but offers just public information. So delighted to do my part in talking about my memoir. And if you want to access those articles, you can go on my website. It's stacysprout.com. I have an email list. If you sign up for that, you'll get, I think within a day, you'll get an email that has links to those articles. So check that out if you're interested. So when I was asked to talk about my book, I was praying about what would be helpful to share. And the idea came through this cool feature that Kindle has. When you publish an ebook, you can go on their system and find out what your readers are underlining in your book. And so it was really a cool experience to go through, and Kindle will collate the top 5, well, they collate the top most underlined passages by readers. And so I decided that I was going to take those top 5 most underlined passages and share what they were, and they turned out to be incredibly key points along the journey of sexual recovery for me. And it reflected back this amazing experience, a belief that I have, which is people know how to heal. There's something inside us, I would say it's our spirit, it's our souls, and it's calling us toward health. And people recognize it because they already know it inside, but it gets covered up, it gets confused. And so when readers read the story and they underline things, I think what it reflected back to me is that, yeah, people know how to heal, and they maybe they just need guidance or, nudges here or there. But that's what was revealed to me by what people were underlining is they really picked out key points, and I want to share those with you today. So I am calling them the 5 key milestones of sexual recovery. They're not really the milestones. I mean, there's lots of milestones, but these are the ones that readers are responding to, and they really made sense to me as I was analyzing the meaning behind the things people underlined. So they are, I'll just read them here, find your will to be well. In other words, if you're in sexual recovery, whether you're just starting or you're along the journey, that you find why, your intent, why you might be willing to do the hard work of recovery, because it's no picnic, anyone can tell you. So there has to be a sense of will inside, something that makes it worthwhile for you. The second one that was highlighted was know your no's. And to me, that's about defining personal sexual integrity, because you decide what it is you will not do. And for many of us, that's through hard-won wisdom and great pain. But getting to that point where you say, these are the things I cannot do in order to be a person in integrity is key. The third one is find your power source, and that is find your source of inspiration. The fourth I call mind your mess, and that has to do with the process of self-reflection and amends. And the fifth one is take it outside, and that's basically what I'm attempting to do today is to be of service, to offer something that might be helpful to even one person that wants to find help or healing from sexual addiction. So, to go into more detail about those 5 key milestones of sexual recovery, the first most, and I love that this was the #1 most underlined point in the entire book. It's a quote, this man said his teacher had told him that the key to happiness was the concept of congruency, where, and I'm going to cry because I feel so touched that most readers, this is what they highlighted, where what you think, feel, and do are in alignment. And I think it's so meaningful to me because in my addiction, I couldn't have that. I didn't have that. I was so powerless. And recovery gave the power to align that. And it's not just what you do, it's what you think and what you feel. So that includes what happens mentally too. It's an incredible path of mastery to that alignment. And so I want to do a reading of where this came from in the book, and it starts from the introduction so that you can put this phrase in more context related to my personal story. The July Seattle evening was balmy as I made my way to the Sexual Recovery 12-step meeting for newcomers. It was 2001, and I was 31 years old. Descending the steps to the church basement, the shadowy stairwell gave well to fluorescent lighting and a pale gray cream linoleum tile floor. Wearing a bright pink tank top and short white shorts, I had on the least clothes of anyone in the room. And it was a big room, full of men, not another woman in sight. At least 30 were already seated, with more arriving. There were men of all ages, though mostly older, and all were sex addicts like me. I don't remember what I was thinking, outside of saying hi to the one man who said hi to me, but my inner dialogue probably went something like this. Oh my God, I'm dressed wrong. Oh look, he's looking at me. Look how quickly he looked away. What is that? Is that sexual sobriety? There's another man looking at me. I look hot. I'm thin and tan. Another. I'm powerful here. I like it. Oh, I am in heaven. It's cold in here. I should have brought a sweatshirt. Where should I sit? I said hi politely to a man who greeted me. He's creepy. I feel like shit. What's wrong with me? Why am I here? I don't belong here. I'm the only woman. God, the meeting is about to start. Where do I sit? No one wants to sit by me. I don't care. Sit down. This chair is cold. I hate these freezing folding metal chairs. I want out of here. As I sat in the circle with my eyes down, I placed all my mental focus on my intuitive feelers, the way I always did back then in groups. Who's looking at me? Who's tuned in to me being here? Who's lusting after me? In the center of my energetic web, I cast invisible tendrils all around the circle. I imagined that I could feel every vibration around me and that I could control them all. I was the spider in the middle of its lair, the black widow in the pink tank top, ready to spring on my prey and devour it. The meeting started with the customary introductions, but I tuned out the words. Wrapped in the familiarity of my web, I was getting high off the vibrations I was starting to feel from the men in the room. Then another sensation intruded, a wave of shame that made me feel like a teenager whose mom had just dropped her off at detention. I ignored it, forcing my thoughts back to the men. Per my energy read, I estimated that approximately 12 of the men were reacting to me. My goal was to get 100% of them to react, but I didn't know then that some of the members were gay and not sexually attracted to women. I also didn't know that some of the straight men were sexually sober and protected from my energetic intrusion by a deep awareness about sexual energy. They knew exactly what I was up to and ignored it. And then the sharing started. That was a little more interesting. Like a Quaker meeting, there was silence. Then randomly someone spoke up, typical of 12-step meetings. The first name intro, but with a twist. Here, they said they were sex addicts. Out loud, in front of everyone. I vaguely recall that several men talked about their lives, but I don't remember anything that was said until I heard the 6 words that have never left me, spoken by an executive type in a tailored suit. He had finely cut, short silver hair and shiny manicured nails, and I can hear his words like it was yesterday. He was telling the group about how he couldn't stop masturbating to porn, even though his wife had caught him multiple times and had given him an ultimatum, quit or else. He said he loved her, but he kept choosing the porn and then lying about it. My half-hearted attention was suddenly riveted on something he said about the way he wanted to live his life instead, a motto his spiritual teacher had given him. My life is an open book. When I heard them, the 6 words seared through me, lighting up something deep and real inside, a longing that was so strong it bordered on excruciating, an ache I felt to my core. Wherever that place in me was, it had been dull, dark, and mostly forgotten for as long as I could remember. My life is an open book. My web vanished, and I began to listen intently. Looking back, I know that hearing those words rebooted me, fundamentally reorganized me around their power, and bonded me to them in a way I'd only been bonded to sex before. They held up a mirror to my own shadowy secrets and ignited a bright light, and the reflection was ugly, but true. This man said his teacher had told him that the key to happiness was the concept of congruency, where what you think, feel, and do are in alignment. He couldn't do it, couldn't get his act together, and he was about to lose his marriage over it. He called that powerlessness, but he longed for something different, something better. And though he hadn't achieved it yet, he wanted to believe it was possible. Suddenly, I did too. So I'll stop there. To me, that highlights a key moment when I found my will to be well. And I formed my intent around it. I wanted that. I wanted to believe. I wanted to have hope. And a lot of my public activism is around trying to carry that message to other people. There is hope, which can be so hard to see when you're in the pain and suffering of sex addiction. Whether you're the sex addict or someone you love is, perhaps a parent or a child, the pain and suffering of that experience, the betrayals, the degradations, it can be really difficult to hang on to that hope. So that was the first key milestone, and the number one thing that readers underlined. So thanks, Max, Maxwell, for your comment. Impactful. And, that's just sitting in a room listening to people share. So human beings can really impact each other. And, I never even told that guy how much those words meant to me. I don't even know him now. I don't know where he is. So those moments are pretty precious. So the second key and highly underlined point is this sentence under the Know Your No's category. And it is, compulsive cycles often involve self-destruction in various forms. And to combat my general sense of helplessness, I added one more pattern to my arsenal to restore my sense of control. So that is in a chapter in the book where I'm talking about having multiple compulsive patterns, multiple addictions. It wasn't just sex addiction for me. It was sex and love and food and money and codependency. And what I love about this quote that people were underlining is it illustrates that it's from a place of helplessness that I kept trying to find something that would give me a sense of control. And yet they were self-destructive. And so the key about knowing your no's is your ability to recognize what your cycles are. And I love a quote I hear in the rooms of 12-step recovery, which is, start with the one that's killing you the quickest. And I remember that many times along my journey. I still do. What is that thing that's causing the utmost chaos in my life? Because I can't change everything. I mean, even times when I would have the insight to see, wow, I'm eating addictively and I'm spending and whatever, and I couldn't stop it. I couldn't stop at all. And so this idea of just bringing it down to, is there one thing that you can say no to today? So this is a chapter about, again, me in early recovery, as you'll see with how my thoughts and my brain works, where I am starting to chew on the concept of integrity, or defining what I will no longer do, defining my sexual sobriety. So I'll read from there. And it happened when I was kind of looking at how I'd been just going to meetings but not really doing anything. I just was showing up at meetings. And I was reconsidering how much I was going to put into this recovery journey, how much effort I was going to do. So I was thinking, maybe I should try harder, I thought. Maybe I should try to figure out what it means to get sober from sex, or with sex. My eyes found the scarred wooden tables. I was at a 12-step meeting. My eyes found the scarred wooden tables stacked with books and pamphlets that I'd always ignored. Finally, with something to do at the end of a meeting besides sit frozen or flee, I approached a man standing near the table. He was in his mid-50s with glasses and a brown goatee, and he greeted me politely, offering to help. I told him I wanted to read about sobriety. With a grin, he handed me a pamphlet. I recommend this one. It'll help you figure out what's right for you, but it helps to go over it with a sponsor. I snatched it like a hungry dog, wary and without thanks, and walked away. I didn't want another sponsor who might send me away again. I went home and read the pamphlet, suddenly becoming obsessed with defining sexual sobriety. The pamphlet suggested I divide all my behaviors related to sexuality into 3 categories: the good, the bad, and the really ugly. It sounded so simple, yet this practical tool to define my own sexual boundaries filled me with a sudden urge of hope. Can I really stop this? Can I really make a sobriety plan and stick to it? I decided to work harder than I had, to really work a program like they said in the meeting. I finally have a tool, I thought. But my attitude quickly shifted from one of rebellion to superiority. I was going to have the best recovery of anyone. Then my mind shifted back to callous disdain for the entire process. The idea of sexual sobriety is insane. I read on and learned that my worst acting out behaviors were defined by what made me feel the most worthless, caused the most harm, and resulted in something called unmanageability. My mind went into battle mode, turning on itself. These 12-step words are so stupid. What does unmanageability even mean? Call it whatever you like. You've got it. You can't manage your life. It's not that bad. Lighten up. Sex addiction is such a melodramatic concept. Sex is fun. Oh, really? Fun? Is it fun to get yourself into umpteen awful situations like that guy's after-hours bachelor party, watching a woman get paid to grind on the groom, terrified out of his mind, while his so-called friends watched and everyone knew about it except his bride-to-be? Was it fun to get wasted and piggyback on that raging guy you met at a bar, only saved from drunken sex, or worse, by Debbie grabbing you and shoving you in her car while the guy screamed at her and tried to grab you back? The friendship didn't last long after that. Was all that really fun? Sullen silence. Face it, sex rules you and you think it's the other way around. If that's not powerlessness and unmanageability, I don't know what is. The only way you'll ever get sober is to be shut up in a convent forever. I felt a surge of hostility, but had to admit that my life wasn't so rosy. I thought back to the two men and their happy, I'm referencing here that I'd seen two men at the meeting greet each other and give each other a hug. I thought back to the two men and their happy greeting. Because I'd heard them talking in meetings for months, I knew that one was a successful software programmer and the other was happily married, running his own business. I, on the other hand, was working a temp job, sinking further into credit card debt and scrounging for a life. Jason, my partner at the time, was supportive now that I was going to sexual recovery meetings. Although we had avoided going to the same ones, he was in recovery too. He's how I learned about it. But things were strained between us. I really did need a new focus. Arriving home that evening, I took out a piece of white notebook paper, turned it lengthwise, and divided it into 3 columns. I didn't know what to write in which column. I quit. Back at the newcomers meeting, I started listening more carefully to the men who'd already written their sobriety statements and who actually read their lists out loud to the whole group. To stay accountable, I related to much of what I've heard. We may be different genders, I thought, but they're succeeding at not doing a lot of things I'm still doing. Still at war inside, I abruptly found myself distracted by a man I'd never noticed before. With his brown curly hair and dark brown eyes, I decided he was definitely my type, a polite veneer, but with the prospect of danger lurking beneath the surface. This man had the intoxicating combination of boyish charm and murderous intensity, and my thoughts of defining sobriety were overrun by an instant, intense attraction. Listening to him became the highlight of my meetings. I learned he was married with a newborn son, but that didn't stop me. I hung on every word he uttered. When he talked about his stress at work and his struggle not to look at other women and pornography, I nodded sympathetically, but inside I was thinking, look at me, here I am. Suddenly, I felt a lot better. It became easier to show up at the meetings, hoping he'd be there. Outside the program gatherings, my mind was distracted by anticipation about when I might see him again. Around this time, a sturdy Italian man who introduced himself as Anthony approached me after a meeting. Even though he was in his mid-40s, I had heard him referred to as a, quote, recovery old-timer because he claimed 14 years of sexual sobriety. He smiled disarmingly as he introduced himself. Hi, how are you? Do you have any questions about how the program works? About the literature? I tried to copy his friendly tone. No, I'm just learning a lot, thanks. After he left, I felt relieved. I wanted to be free to focus on my new favorite object, the brown-haired, brown-eyed man. I drank him in with my eyes, trying to be subtle about it in case Anthony or someone else noticed. I started obsessing about him, even as I tried not to fantasize because I knew he was married and that couldn't be sober. I failed. I was getting comfortable again with another secret attraction, despite the oft-repeated recovery slogan, you're only as sick as your secret. When it came to sex, I was still far more comfortable with secrets than the truth. One day after the meeting, I found myself edging toward the brown-haired man. When he turned and left the room, I followed. I want to ask him about his recovery program, I told myself. I trotted up the stairs to the outside of the church. The air was crisp, but I felt warm, my heart beating faster. Turning a corner, I looked around and saw him heading toward a pretty brunette who'd come out of the meeting for partners with sex addicts. He smiled and gave her a big hug. My heart sank. That must be his wife, I thought, the mother of his baby boy. I felt ashamed. I went home and started filling in the columns to, quote, define my sobriety. In the left, the worst of the worst columns, I wrote, intrigues with men, compulsive masturbation with or without pornography, dressing provocatively to seek sexual attention from men, hurting myself physically, and anonymous sex. Then I wrote my sobriety date, today. I am very grateful to say that that day was April 18th, 2004. Well, no, that's not true. I had a relapse after that. That's my sobriety date now. Yeah. But it was a long time ago. It's painful to read that story still. And I'm sad at the fact that I didn't have the power to be aligned with the values that when someone makes a commitment to someone else, that is to be honored, and that trying to seduce or coerce someone out of their commitment is wrong. And I know that now, but then I didn't have integrity, and that is something that I have been given the gift of learning and being able to follow through on since my sobriety date. And I see that someone in the quote has said that they use SMART recovery and REBT tools. And I just want to acknowledge that there's many ways to recover. And in my mind, whatever works, go for it. So thank you, Maxwell, for your comments very much. The next popular underlined milestone has to do with inspiration, and that is finding your power source. Thank you, Laura. The gift of learning, yes. So what was underlined here was the quote, my reaction after the visit would teach me that ignoring my true feelings to fit in with my family could no longer coexist with a sexually sober life. And what this meant to me, it actually does refer to my current continuous sobriety date. I had gone on a visit with my family for a holiday, and there were so many things that I didn't say, I hadn't processed through, and so many feelings that I didn't know how to deal with. And so as soon as I got home, I went back to pornography and compulsive masturbation, and I had a relapse. And so what that quote tells me is that the power source that I needed had to extend more widely than my family. And, you know, there was nothing even bad or abusive that happened during that family visit, which a lot of times for people, you know, criticism or terrible things happen when they see their family. But for me, it was just all the unprocessed truth inside me and pain. And so what I want to read is when I reached outside my family of origin and I found a sponsor and someone like a mentor to guide me through the challenging path of going within and looking at myself and looking at my notions of power and higher power, whatever that meant. And so I'm going to do this reading related to find your power source, and then I see a question from Tracy, and I'm going to respond to that after. So this has to do with my sponsor who's telling me to stay sober. So basically don't do that list of things that I had detailed as my sobriety integrity statement. And that statement changed and evolved over time, which is pretty normal in recovery, but that's, he said, stay sober and write about your understanding of what power is, particularly the divine or God or whatever, write about that. So he was telling me to journal, basically turning me back into myself, telling me to explore what my truth was. And so this is where I go from there. Other than a desperate prayer or two in the previous months, I hadn't thought seriously about God for a long time. On a wet and dreary day, I sat down at the kitchen table and wrote in my journal. And I want to give a heads up, there's an F-bomb coming here. Dear God, fuck you. I feel so sick of struggling, I won't do it anymore. I refuse to live a half-assed existence anymore. If I don't feel inspired, I won't do it. As for the Spirit supporting and loving me, I say, action. I read it out loud, what I'd written in my journal, to my sponsor when we met at a Seattle tea house later that week. I didn't yell the words, although I wanted to, but I proudly showed him the page with this oversized capital letters, and he got the picture. I was pissed at God. Good start, he said. Write some more. Keep exploring your feelings and thoughts about God, whatever that means to you. Now that you're doing step writing, we'll meet every week. So suddenly, I was having more support. I dutifully went home and wrote more, my rage slightly subdued this time. Dear friggin' Spirit, I feel bubbling oceans of fear deep within me. I am swallowing sugar as a pacifier, and I know I am using it as a drug to get by. May I never judge another addict who reaches in desperation for comfort and nurturing as they understand it. I hurt. I suffer here. I can't plan fun. I can only take one day at a time, and that's that. Okay. I feel scared. I feel scared. I feel scared. I feel scared. What am I going to do? I was abused, and I won't or can't go on without telling this truth. So what really happened? I hardly remember. My life will live the truth. I won't pretend. What does, quote, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves can restore us to sanity mean to me? I put down my pen. To me, God was an old white man in a white robe sitting on a throne. I couldn't relate to him. I wondered why I felt so mad when I thought of God, where all the hate came from. My thoughts drifted back to when, as a child, Mom started making us go to Sunday Mass, and then the words began to flow again. And in the book, I write more about what I journaled about, and I'm not going to read that today. It's part of my story that unfolded, and to me, the principle of inspiration is that everybody has their own journal entry about what that means to them. But I reached a point in my journaling where I realized that I went to church as a child, and even though we were going to church, no one saw what was happening to me, which is I was being hurt. So I was journaling about that. Then I'll pick up the writing here. Agitated, I slammed my journal shut. Despite my conviction to face my past, I could not tolerate thoughts of a God who could allow me to be sexually abused, nor a church or so-called family who hadn't even noticed. A couple of days later, I called my sponsor and told him I was stuck on my second step and couldn't make myself write anymore. Be creative then, he said. Find another way that works for you to explore what a caring God might mean in your life. Throw out everything from your past that doesn't work. You're an adult, so you decide, not your parents or the church. And read the AA Big Book I gave you, a chapter called Bill's Story. When I did, I was struck by the story of Bill W., the founder of AA, especially when his friends said to him, "Why don't you choose your own conception of God?" I felt confused. How could a person, not a priest or a pope, define what God was? That seemed wrong, bad, dangerous, a sin. I went on to ponder more about the lessons of my upbringing and sex and what was a sin, and so I'm going to skip ahead. If I'm supposed to be figuring out my own definition of God, I'm not sure I want one who condemns what seems like a natural desire for pleasure. Why give me a desire in the first place and then curse me for expressing it? What kind of God is that? So I go on to talk about what was my power source. And for me, it's grown and changed over time, over the 15 years or so since I started sexual recovery. guess it was 2001, so 16 years now. And once again, it doesn't matter as much what my source of power is. It matters to me a great deal, but to me it matters what the source is for each person individually. That's their own journey that only they can take. And I found a mentor who could guide me into sorting that out for me. So I'm going to take this. There's a question here from Tracy, and I just want to acknowledge, I don't know if I have permission to read the whole question or if it's public, but the gist of the question, I think, is very universal, which is someone in a relationship starting to realize they may have an issue with sex and love addiction and wondering, is there hope? Is there hope for them? Particularly if they're finding out, let's say, in midlife. So, you know, what I would say is, yes, there's absolutely hope. Midlife is a fine time to find out. I mean, we're in the absolute dawn of a new awareness about the reality about sexual compulsion and the ability to try talking about it and to find resources. And so I'm grateful that you are here and that you are asking. And there are, you know, like CHS they have people you can call and talk with them. And there are treatment centers all around the country. There's all around the world. So it's a good time to be becoming aware that there might be an issue and pursuing help. So thanks for asking. Another question that was raised by Kirsten, and yes, questions are okay, that's great. How do you know if you are a sex addict? And so there's, on my website, I put a tab which is, Am I a Sex Addict? So if you want, you could go to stacysprout.com and just look up that tab. There are 10 questions on there, and you can just take your current life, and it is about your current life and behavior in terms of, you know, is it a current issue? People sometimes say, well, I used to have a lot of sex years ago, and I stopped that. So we definitely, to me, it's not about exactly what somebody does per se. It's about how they do it, how they experience themselves sexually. And so there are also there are several 12-step fellowship programs. Sex Addicts Anonymous is one. Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous is another. They both have websites. You can go on those websites and you can take, they have tests on there that you can take. And again, as Charlie is stating, you can call the Center for Healthy Sex, 310-843-9902. They have people standing by and they could talk with you about what you're wondering for yourself. So back to the sense of inspiration, for me, there was definitely a need to find people around. That was a key part of not being alone and isolated. So this is the kind of thing like asking questions, being willing to pick up the phone and making an attempt to just be curious about something that might be an area of great growth opportunity. So the last reading that I have today, there's another comment that I want to respond to before I jump into that. It's someone who has taken tests. No need to apologize. I really appreciate the dialogue about what's going on. It's someone who says, what if now it is a feeling that just comes over you sometimes can't control? And I mean, I certainly can relate to that in my own recovery. I think it depends on what is done with that feeling. Are there things that are done that lead someone to feel incredible shame, incredible pain, self-destruction? Even then, it may not be to the point of addiction. It may be something like impulse. Sometimes there are, at least I had many times in my own recovery where there were things related to past abuse, trauma, and hurt. But sometimes it's just really strong desire to engage in highly sexualized media or relationships, desire to belong. There's many things that can be influencing it. So for me, I found that the combination of some kind of what I call the tribal support and skilled therapy to address the trauma of past sexual abuse, that combination was incredibly helpful. And for people who have not been sexually abused, I mean, you know, my colleague Rob Weiss talks about the two types of sex addiction, and one type is people who have been traumatized as children, neglected, abused, who are using it as part of a compensation pattern and trying to find that control that I spoke of. Another kind of sex addiction he talks about is more related to the power of the sexually explicit media itself that is so engrossing that becomes addictive. Today's, live streaming pornography, it's incredibly powerful what's out there. And so for those people, they may not have grown up with abuse or trauma in any way that is easy to see. Although the neglect of subjecting people to media, especially children, is something I think more people are starting to talk about in society, how to prevent that. So, yeah, if you are having overwhelming urges relating to want to act sexually in a way that goes against your values, then that's a good thing to find someone to talk about, someone you really trust, maybe a professional, and get support around that, around defining what your integrity is and how do you get the help so that you don't cross that. So thanks for the question and comment. So it's interesting for me that actually ties into this this key concept, what I call mind your mess. And I feel like sexual abuse survivors often have to clean up other people's messes as well as their own. And that was definitely my experience. I didn't get apologies from most of the ways that harm was done to me. But some of it I did, because I'm a third generation recovery person. So my mom got into recovery and my father got into recovery. And so there's been a lot of healing, and then in their generation there was grandparents that got into recovery as well. But there was still a lot to do. I still carried a huge burden of shame from my family and from myself. And so this this number 4 key, and the one that was popular underline, is this statement: when you feel shame, acknowledge it, thank it even, and get right back to work. Finishing your work to make it right is what will get the shame off your back. And I think a lot of people who are curious about sex addiction they have a familiar sense of shame. And it's interesting because there's a quote there: "Thank you, I'm afraid to talk with my therapist about this, even though he specializes in sex addiction. How do I open that dialogue?" And I think shame is the strangler. It keeps us quiet. And so this is something my sponsor was telling me. It's like, get to work. Just get to work. Okay, I hear you, shame, I see you, shame, but got to get to work and making it right. And so this is specific around the spiritual progress through the 12 steps and going back through one's life and looking at people that I hurt. And so that's what this reading is about. Opening the dialogue with a therapist is not an easy thing to do, but hopefully they're a safe person. And you can bookend, talk with someone before the session and after, so that if the therapist doesn't respond in a way you feel comfortable with, you can talk that over with someone safe and maybe bring it back in for the conversation. But someone who specializes in sex addiction has hopefully had some kind of training, so they have an understanding of how difficult it may be to talk about how incredibly vulnerable it can be to talk about these kinds of powerlessnesses. So I'm going to do this last reading. And again, thank you for the question. I wish you courage in your effort to talk about it with a therapist. That's often a great first place to start. And yeah, so I'm reading a beautiful chat about someone who's saying that they're crying and they're not sure why. It's overwhelming to hear someone talk so openly about something that you're afraid is a problem. It can be overwhelming. I appreciate your acknowledgement of that. I think because I've been in recovery for all these years and moving into, I work professionally in the field, we talk about it all the time. So I can sometimes forget how difficult it is. So thanks for the reminder. And those tears often are just tears of just detox tears. Just let it out, sacred tears. Because shame doesn't survive very well with tears. Tears and the vulnerability of the heart tend to be part of that dissolving of shame. So I'm going to do this last reading, and we'll see where we are for times for questions, because I just saw a great one in the text box. Okay, so this is about my effort to deal with trying to clean up the mess of my life in terms of the people I'd hurt in my sex addiction. I finally reached steps 8 and 9, which Diego, my sponsor, explained involved making a list of everyone I'd harmed in my life and becoming willing to make amends to them, which is step 8. Step 9 involved actually contacting everyone to apologize, or if I couldn't find them, or doing so would be harmful to them, taking symbolic actions to make things right. Make your list, check it twice, quit being naughty, and start being nice, I sang in my head mockingly, bravado papering over my terror at the reality of itemizing and facing all those I had harmed. Still going on faith, I had no idea the total life overhaul that was coming. I didn't know how much pain that hurting others had also caused me, nor how much relief my attempts to repair my mistakes would bring. My sponsor Diego said I'd be approaching people directly to tell them what I did to harm them and to express remorse, or if that wasn't possible, to do an indirect amends instead. But with all situations, I had to be sure I was treating people better going forward, and that was called a living amends. This list will never end, I thought. Everyone I've ever known will be on it. I was even supposed to include names of people or institutions I'd chronically resented, like the Catholic Church, because Diego said it was harmful to hate. It's not being angry with someone or having healthy conflict that's a problem, he explained in our weekly talk, but the constant fantasies of revenge or hate. You won't tell anyone you secretly hated them, but you will need to work through it and treat them and yourself with mental respect now. Does that make sense? It didn't, but I plugged away anyway, using my computer to create a spreadsheet to list names or using descriptions when I couldn't recall the names. Some were general, like, quote, unknown men I've objectified or intrigued with, or, quote, guy who knocked on the frat room door. Looking at my list and trying to write down the harm I caused evoked so much defensive anger that I was venting in meetings and in my head for weeks. None of my abusers will come to me to apologize. Why do I have to clean up their messes? Why should I have to take responsibility for the ravages of my mom's alcoholism? For Dad's raging? It isn't my fault I was ignored and abused. That's the only reason I acted this way. They're to blame, not me. No one cares anyway. No one remembers all these stupid things I did. It doesn't matter. What kind of a crazy program is this? Nobody does this. No normal person apologizes to everyone from their past. People will think I'm insane. My mind droned on and on, minimizing the harm I'd caused, shifting the blame to everyone and everything but me, and leaving my head throbbing. To calm myself down, I tried to visualize a bright red stop sign instead of the thoughts, but it didn't work. I visualized passing clouds and attempted to focus on my breath instead of the turmoil in my head. I used every trick I'd learned for dealing with obsession without success. No matter what else I was doing, my mind kept circling back to the anger, like a tongue continually pushing against a painfully decayed loose tooth. Finally exhausted, I complained to Diego that I was stalled again. He told me to stop working on my amends list and go back to step 4, writing out my resentments. Whenever you're stuck on a step, he explained, it usually means you have more work to do on an earlier one. He also recommended I read the promises to myself every day to inspire me. I should know them by heart by now, I thought. I grumbled to myself about the reading from the AA book I'd heard at almost every meeting. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. So basically, I finally, despite my struggle, started writing a list to the people that I had harmed. And I heard a prayer that I could do to help me with that process because it seemed overwhelming, which was Spirit, which is how I like to refer to my higher power. Spirit, please help me see my part. So then I wrote down a list. As I kept writing the list, the names, and what I had done, feelings of self-loathing swept over me. Trying to stay calm, I inhaled so deeply I felt dizzy. Thoughts of killing myself resurfaced, but I remembered what Diego had said about feeling shame when working on steps 8 and 9, which brought some measure of comfort. Shame will come, and it's okay, he said. It's natural to feel shame when we've hurt others. That's called a conscience. It's what keeps us from being psychopaths. The problem is when you're shameless and you act it out, or so full of shame you get frozen, and then don't do what you need to do to make it right. Not dealing with the shame is a big part of what contributes to addiction and relapse. Some people kill themselves trying to escape it, but that doesn't fix anything. When you feel shame, acknowledge it, thank it even, and get right back to work. Finishing your work to make it right is what will get the shame off your back. And that's just really been true for me. Yep, that has really been true. Along with trauma work to clear out the pain inside that maybe other people didn't, the messes they didn't clean up that they acted out on me. So those are the first 4 of the underlined keys. The 5th key, I'm loading the slide here, is take it outside. And Kirsten, I'm going to come back to your question after this one. So this is a quote, again, someone I talked to that I met in sexual recovery, and I didn't know how to talk about what was going on with me. I didn't know how to share in meetings, and he gave me some advice. He was a long-time sober man. He said, lead with your vulnerability. And I didn't know what that meant, but he continued, focus on your heart, find something trembling there, and try to say it. Say the thing you are afraid to say. Your heart won't steer you wrong. And that's been my effort in terms of writing my book, sharing my story, and just trying to find a way to live. So there's a question here, and there's a kind, supportive text coming through from a colleague and friend, Vicki. Thank you. Someone who said, I am moving from sexual anorexia to wanting sex. Are they the same thing? And what I can say from my own experience is I had both. I had the sexual acting out, kind of the binging, and then the deprivation, like no sex. And you could hear it when I was illustrating my inner dialogue before, where I was in denial, like, oh, sex addiction's not a thing. And then I would come back at myself and say, you should be shut up in a convent forever. And those were the 2 sides of the extremes. So one side is kind of shameless, I can do whatever I want. And then the other side was, sex is bad and you're bad. And so a lot of people, especially survivors of sexual abuse or having a parent who was sexually abused or inheriting kind of that belief system, go to those extremes. And one thing I talk about, I have the privilege to talk about with the clients that I work with who stay sober long, they first they find and define their sexual integrity, and then they find the power source to keep it, to hold it. And they clean up their messes, and then it's what about sex? Where does sex live for them in their life? And my experience is that sex is an incredible part of the life force and the creativity and the connection, and but there's often some old beliefs that have to be looked at related to sex being bad, and kind of sorting that out of trauma, because oftentimes it gets tied up in there like, oh, sex causes hurt, and it can, but it can also be incredibly healing and powerful. So that becomes the work of recovery. So we're just about out of time in terms of the hour. I'm wondering if there's any other kind of last-minute chat things to be said, or otherwise it might be time to wrap up. Okay.
All right. I want to thank
Staci.
Staci.
So I want to. Oh, hi, Charlie.
Hi. I just want to thank Staci again for coming and talking to us today, and to thank everyone who participated in the discussion. It was a really great chat back and forth. Please join us again. It's the second Friday of every month. We have the guest webinar series, and you can find out more information on upcoming webinars on our website, centerforhealthysex.com. You should definitely also check out Staci's website, stacysprout.com, and you can find her book on Amazon. And if you get it on Kindle, you can add more highlights to it. Thanks again, Staci, and thanks everyone else. Hope you have a wonderful weekend.
You're very welcome, and thank you everyone for being here. This was really fun, and it was an honor. So thanks for having me, Charlie. Thanks to CHS.
All right, thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.